Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining myself and Dominic for the session on cyber insurance and cybersecurity, the latest trends and developments in the space. I'm Natalie Chan. I'm a account executive with Waypoint Insurance. So what that means is I handle insurance programs and in general, the risk profile. So cyber insurance is one piece, but I also work with companies in terms of the other pieces like property, liability, etc. I've been in the business for 20 years. I've worked at many different levels of firms. I also provide risk management advice and insurance. Of course, it's a small piece of that. And the outcomes of that is I help organizations improve their resiliency and hopefully provide a reduction on cost. I am a certified risk manager as my background. Next slide, please, Dom. A couple quick facts about Waypoint Insurance Company that I work for, the broker. We have been in Canada for 150 years. The name of our company refers to a navigational tool, which is quite interesting. And we also are part of the Navicord Group, which is one of Canada's top 5 insurance brokers. Next slide, please, Dom. So cyber insurance. Well, what is cyber? It's definitely a buzzword you hear about in the news, especially in the last couple of years or so. What you hear about is often the large organizations having issues. And what you don't hear about are all the small and mid-sized companies that are getting ransomware attacked and hit, and whether hopefully sometimes they have insurance, sometimes they don't. And if they do have insurance, what does it actually cover? What does it protect? Simply put, it covers data, right? Information you're trying to protect. So it's important to look at your organization to see, well, what kind of information do you actually have, or are you responsible for safekeeping? Typically, it's personal identifiable information, PII, and it's important to know it's where these individuals reside, not where you do business or where your company is headquartered. So it's actually the information of your customers, for example, where they reside. Do they reside in Sweden? Do they reside in the United States? Or do they reside in Canada? And that's where the applicable laws of each jurisdiction apply. So in addition to that, there's confidential corporate information, secret sauce. So things that are valuable to a business in terms of their business assets that are intangible, all of these are attractive to criminals. And of course, it's disruptive to your business if it's lost. I'll stop there. Is there any questions on this slide? Thank you. Next slide, please, Dom. Cybercrime. It's really a component of cyber coverage, but it could also be crossover to a separate type of policy called crime. And really what it covers is the loss of money. The loss of money that your balance sheet, really. And it's important to protect it by different ways. Yes, you can buy insurance, but I really recommend my clients to look at their internal protocols and controls, because in my opinion, that's more important than having an insurance policy. Insurance is the fallback, the catch-all, but it's better that you have strong internal controls and protocols to keep the loss from happening in the first place. Okay. There's different ways of how criminals can access your money. And some of these were familiar from the media: social engineering fraud, so impersonating senior executives. The ones that you don't typically hear in the news are the fraudulent invoices, okay? So criminals that create invoices in names of companies that are very similar sounding to your legitimate customers in amounts that are small enough that are not going to be raising suspicion, and your accounts payable department, your accounting team just, transfer funds without really verifying and knowing it's actually a fraudulent transfer. And the losses I've seen are typically these kind of issues happen over a long period of time before it's discovered. And by the time it's discovered, it's now in millions of dollars. even though each transaction was 10,000, 5,000, 20,000, etc. Dom, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I really think it's important to have strong internal controls. And yes, having insurance is important, but this is where it's going to protect your organization the most. Okay. In terms of knowing the type of data that you do have, well, what do you have? Do you have consent? Is it necessary? What are you using it for? Right? How long do you keep it? And what are the ways you safeguard it? So these are all kind of things that the organization need to think about when we're talking about internal controls. We should designate an individual to be a chief privacy officer. Does this person have to know everything about privacy laws? No, they do not. They just have to be the person responsible to run through the plan and execute the steps when something goes awry. Okay. The plan is very important. This is called the business continuity plan. Okay. The plan is, if this happened, or we come into the office Monday morning, we can't access into our system because it's locked, and by criminals. What do we do? Who do we call? It's really important to develop that plan and also implement and practice that plan, right? So everybody in the company knows if they come to, they discover an issue, these are the steps and measures that they need to do, okay? In terms of safeguards, physical measures, I'm going to let Dom talk about that more because he is the expert in the room with respect to the actual safeguards and measures on cybersecurity, and also, of course, backup. But having said that, the weakest link is still always a human error. So any employees, sometimes it could be outside, vendors, there's a lot of ways that an organization could be vulnerable. So from there, I might segue a bit more into Dom and into Dom's topic in terms of what insight he has to offer on cybersecurity. Risk transfer. So this is insurance, right? There's a few different ways you can transfer your risk. Insurance is one way. You're paying a premium to the insurance company, and they're standing behind a promise to pay 1 million, 2 million, whatever, when something goes wrong. There are actually other ways you could transfer your risk. You can sometimes download it via way of contract to a third party, okay? And these are called indemnity clauses, okay? I'm not a lawyer, so for full details, you should be consulting your legal professional. I can offer advice from an insurance perspective. Having very strong indemnity clauses, limiting your liability in a contract, it's important. What I usually see is clients, sophisticated clients will limit their liability to either the value of the contract or in any event, no more than 2.5 times of the value of the contract. They're not accepting unlimited liability. It doesn't stop anyone else from suing them for any amount. However, it's a way to strengthen, your defense when it comes to, a legal issue. So back to the insurance risk transfer piece. So if you were to decide to transfer it via insurance, the coverage falls typically into two main buckets: your first party coverage and your third party coverage. First party really covers costs for the organization themselves. So crisis management, breach coaching and response, public relations, forensic accounting, notification costs for individuals, credit monitoring services. Third party refers to your liability for other parties. So if you were sued, class action lawsuits, fines and penalties imposed by different government bodies, that's covered under your third party liability. And then some insurers will provide additional services for pre-breach. So before something happens, they'll have a way of monitoring your company's name in dark web and make sure that it's not mentioned, there's no data leak, etc. I'll stop there. Are there any questions? Thanks, Dom. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Natalie, I do have a question, but maybe you will talk about that later on. If there's insurance, if something were to happen, will the insurance company actually look at your at the prevention that you have put in place, your systems and everything to protect yourself? And if they feel that you have been negligent, then not pay out the money per the insurance?
That's a great question. So there's two parts to that. So typically in the underwriting process, that is before they accept you to offer you insurance, they already look at the processes you have in place in terms of managing your risk, right? So then they look at, by asking questions and digging deep into operations, then they decide how much they want to charge you and what they're going to offer you in terms of coverage amount. So there's that part. Now, if something were to happen, you have insurance. You're saying that if you declare, if you say you had firewall, for example, and in reality you don't. So either you lied or on your application or you misrepresented. Well, then that's an issue when it comes to a claim, right? The insurance company can say, well, you never disclosed to us, like it was answered in the application that you do have the security in place, but in fact, you do not, right? So that could become a contentious issue when it comes to a claim.
Yeah, or the firewall was in place during the application, but then, failed or was taken out, whatever. So at that time, would they then, check at all those factors and then, choose not to pay out?
And again, that's it's very case by case dependent, depending on the insurance company, depending on the nature of the relationship of your broker, the strength of your brokerage relationship with that insurance company. A lot of times it does kind of fall in these what we call gray areas, and how likely the insurance company is going to pay really comes down to how much business do they have with that particular broker, right? And that broker, how are they going to advocate on the client's behalf to get that claim paid? So those are some subtleties in terms of when choosing your insurance broker. Is really important to choose someone that knows how to handle claims and can walk you through how a claim process works with that particular insurance company, who they are, do they have boots on the ground, what's their relationship, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you. So right now, the average cost of a data breach in Canada is about $5 million. And I could tell you, most of my clients are only buying $1 million to $2 million worth of coverage. So in essence, many people are underinsured. Now, it doesn't mean that, sometimes it's not that they don't want to buy more, they can't buy more. Or sometimes it becomes a cost issue. It's not cost effective for them to buy more. But definitely I would be recommending, as of right now, we need to be looking at average coverage amounts of $5 million. And the premium cost is going to be very subjective. It's a wide range, $2,500 a year to $50,000. I mean, depending on the size of your organization, what you're doing, what kind of controls and security you have in place, what's your loss history like, but I'll go into that in the next few slides. So before the underwriters will provide you with an insurance policy, how much they'll offer and what they'll charge, these are the questions that they'll be looking for. They'd want to see some strong protocols and protection internal controls you have in place. They want to see that your data is encrypted, both remote and also on-site. They want to see ideally daily backups of your information. They want to see MFA, multi-factor authentication process. They'll also scan your open ports. So, and they'll scan do an external scan, and they'll see that if anything that's not closed, they want to know why and whether you know about it. The insurance underwriter want to see that you have a business continuity plan in place. They'll want a copy of that plan. And the last few are quite important. Your company culture and attitude towards security. You can't just rely on IT, whether that's outsourced or in-house. It's everybody's job. So ongoing training for your employees is really important. And the weakest link in terms of how these issues arise is always a human error. And lastly, past history. Underwriters always look to see past history. Now, if you've had an issue in the past, in cyber, it doesn't make you less attractive. In fact, sometimes it makes you more attractive as a potential client, because as long as you've done enough to mitigate. So, you've had this issue in the past, you've changed your ways, and you've implemented new, stronger controls. In fact, it makes you more attractive to cyber insurer. That's where it's a little different than the traditional property and liability carrier. Next slide, please, Dom. And on that note, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Natalie, and thanks, Pascal, for this opportunity. My slide deck got a little warped, so it's not quite updated. But so just very quickly about myself, I've been in cybersecurity 20 years. I had been with CyberSC, which is my company I started 10 years ago, but I've now gone to another venture called Vogel Leadership and Coaching, where I still specialize in cybersecurity advisory and leadership services for small and mid-sized organizations. But I also do executive coaching, mainly for tech startups and security startups as well. I've been frequent security commentator, radio, TV, social media in Vancouver and abroad, and looking forward to parlaying what Natalie started off with, and really trying to focus maybe this part of the presentation more so on what I refer to as digital trust or cyber trust. It's a currency which I really believe has been evolving over the past few years, and rather than just talking about the proactive security controls, which I think Natalie did a fantastic job doing already, I wanted to help shift the conversation around how cybersecurity and cyber risk management should be seen less as a do we need to do this kind of thing or necessary evil, and more so as a business enabler. And I really believe that we've entered this age where more and more we're seeing organizations that are able to demonstrate their cybersecurity capabilities, that they're gaining a competitive advantage, especially those that are B2B organizations, through the rise of increased supply chain risk management and vendor risk management. Especially larger B2B organizations, they are really clamping down when it comes to assessing the cybersecurity capabilities of the vendors and suppliers that they trust. So if you're a B2B organization and you're not in a position where you can readily and adequately present your cybersecurity posture or your cybersecurity capabilities, you could easily be losing out business to your closest competitors who are able to do so in a more quick and efficient manner. For me, like I said, I really believe we've entered this era where doing security effectively is a source of competitive advantage, and done right, it's about creating value and it's driving success for an organization. So Natalie already did a great job covering this, so I won't break that one down. But a great spot that I always love starting when it comes to really understanding cyber risk, especially like I said, at the leadership level, the highest echelons of an organization, whether you're a business owner, whether you're a CEO, CFO, COO, maybe sit on a board of directors, more and more you cannot be passing the buck to the IT team, the IT guys, or your outsourced service provider. More and more, there's basically a fiduciary duty, the higher up the chain you go, to be able to demonstrate that from a leadership function, from a board function, that you are asking the right questions and you're providing the right oversight and governance around cyber risk. You can no longer plead that you didn't know or that you were blissfully unaware. That's just no longer the case. So something to maybe just take as actionable advice to bring back to your organization, questions that you can start asking among your leadership team. Like I said, these aren't even questions you need to send down to the tech folks. These are questions you should be having at the leadership level. So the first one is, what is the threat environment that we face? Really having a good understanding of what the cyber risks and cyber threats that your organization faces are really important, because that's going to help dictate what your strategy and your spend and is when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber risk management. So if you are, if you're as an example, if you're in the financial services industry, well, you protect a lot of sensitive data. Maybe you are in manufacturing or a tech company, have a lot of intellectual property. Well, potentially, the Chinese government or Chinese hackers can be trying to get that. Maybe you are just a standard B2B organization that's just trying to maybe you're a bakery. Believe it or not, every company faces some level of cyber threat. Every company relies on their IT systems. And just to sort of illustrate that point, probably about 2 months ago, someone reached out to me from a porta potty company, right? Like I said, I've been at this 20 years, never had a porta potty company reach out to me regarding cybersecurity and cyber risk, but that's where we are. We are so intertwined digitally with our systems, whether they are online or we're hosting them ourselves. Every organization, big or small, doesn't matter what you're doing. I always jokingly say that unless you're selling tacos out of the back of your Volvo in all cash deals, you are a digital company and you need to grapple with cyber risk accordingly. Next two questions, focusing around that cyber risk profile as from those, looking outside in. So that's sort of an extension of what we were talking about from the threat environment, but also as defined by internal leadership. Again, being able to have that conversation in terms of what is that sensitive data? What are our most critical systems? What are the data and systems that make us as an organization tick? What are those systems that allow us to fulfill our mission? And being able to understand that through a cyber risk lens is so important. The next one I think is a really important one, is to be able to demonstrate it or discuss it in terms of economic terms. So let's say as a company, you experience ransomware and you're unable to access the data that you need on a daily basis to fulfill your mission. What does that mean in terms of downtime? So if you are unable to access your most critical systems, your most critical data, if you're down for an hour, what does that mean in terms of economic terms? 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, a day, 3 days. It's sort of what I refer to as what is your breaking point, or the crying uncle point. At what point will you shout no more? And I think that too is important, because again, that will help dictate your security spend and your approach to cybersecurity strategy. An organization that can tolerate being down for 3 days, much different than an organization that can only tolerate, an hour's worth of downtime. And again, these are decisions that need to be made at the highest echelons of their organization. Your IT team or your IT service provider should not be making that decision for you.
Don, if I may add to that,
yeah.
In terms of sort of, in a business interruption as a result of a cyber incident, right? The business interruption loss is the biggest piece I see coming out of a cyber claim. Okay, it costs a lot of money. An insurance company have to pay for that if you have insurance, but that's what's happened when you're down for 1 day, 5 days, 7 days. Every day you're losing revenue as a result of downtime. And the business interruption risk as a result of a cyber, incident is far greater than, a manufacturer that there's water damage or your building's on fire. There's much more significant risk in terms of an issue and a downtime in terms of cyber exposure. I just want to add to that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Natalie. And that's so important to even intertwine that, like you mentioned there, with a business continuity plan, right? These are the types of conversations that need to be had, like I said, at the board level, at the executive level. This is not an IT function only, or an IT responsibility, or the responsibility of your service provider. I cannot tell you how many organizations, small and mid-sized organizations I've talked to, that when I talk about cyber risk to them, they say, "Oh, we're good, right? We outsource that." You don't outsource the risk, right? This is a business-facing risk. This is one of the most, you read any of the reports from the World Economic Forum, cyber risk is consistently, over the past probably decade, listed as one of the top 3 risks facing organizations today. We need to reframe this, take less of the technical talk out of this, and look at this as a risk. This is not a technical issue. This is a risk. It's no different than personnel risk, operational risk, financial risk. It basically belongs in the risk domain of the organization. Now, this is again a tangible takeaway to be able to, if you are a business owner, non-technical leader, questions that you can bring to your tech team, whether they're internal, whether they're an outsourced service provider. More and more, one of the most common things that I see with small and mid-sized businesses right across the country is that there is a communication chasm between the business and the tech team. Like I said, whether they are internal or outsourced. Both sides make assumptions about the other. Neither side seems to be able to communicate well with the other. And as a result, when something bad happens, there's a hell of a lot of finger pointing. So that's where people like me often position myself as being a conduit. I put myself right in the middle there, and jokingly refer to myself as a cheap therapist, where I'm basically being able to talk to both sides. So if you're worried about where things are, if you haven't checked the temperature from your with your tech team, or if you're engaging in what I refer to as blind trust, these are great questions to at least start facilitating conversations with your technical team. And again, in no particular order, starting off with what's our plan to respond to a data breach. Being able to respond to a data breach has a technical component, but also built on top of that is a company component from a PR perspective, from a communications perspective, right? So being aligned there is important. Next one's focusing around more technical monitoring. How are we not just focusing on preventative measures, but how are we looking from a detection and response capability perspective, right? Who's checking the systems, right? Do we have 24/7, 365 eyes, or are we only looking sort of 8 to 4? If there's anything I've learned over the past 20 years is that cyber criminals work 24/7, 365, and especially in the age of artificial intelligence and automation, they can just let these scripts and various attacks happen automatically. So who's watching the systems? Another one is, and I get asked this one a lot, so I put in my checklist here, how do we verify the effectiveness of the security? A lot of small and mid-sized business owners will just blindly trust what their service provider is saying. Oh, we do security XYZ. Don't worry, we're secure. Well, how do we know, right? Have you run tests? Have you had a third party perform an assessment? What does good look like when it comes to the effectiveness of the security systems? Next one is around least privilege. So this is, I think, very much a company-facing issue as well. Don't give people access to everything on your IT systems, right? You don't give people keys to the kingdom if they don't need it. In this day and age, you need to follow what's referred to as the principle of least privilege. People should only have access to the data and the systems that they need in order to fulfill their job, their function, what have you. Otherwise, you're just taking on needless risk in over-provisioning access. Next one is focusing around, again, third-party access. I was talking about that earlier. Vendor risk management. How are we controlling access around vendors? How are we assessing that if vendors are accessing our internal network, that they have been properly vetted and that we've done some security checks? So one of my personal favorites is, where are we, in terms of cybersecurity and cyber risk? Are we sort of straddling the line here where this is sort of a business and IT responsibility? Is the board and if there's a board or the executives, are they providing the right oversight and guidance for IT in order to be able to fulfill the security function? I think that's a really important question to be able to have a conversation around. Next one is around data protection, right? Do you know what I refer to as the data crown jewels? Do you know what the most important data is in your organization? Do you know where it lives? And do you know who has access to it, right? Taking a very data-centric, risk-centric approach to security is much more effective than just trying to secure everything. If you try to secure, there's an old adage, if you try to secure everything, you actually end up securing nothing. So I think it's really important to take that approach and recognize that the most important stuff should be secured to a higher degree compared to maybe your Miley Cyrus MP3s or whatever it is that you listen to. The next one is around remote access. And this very much came to light during the pandemic, as we went from many organizations being within the sort of the 4 company walls to being hybrid, or to being fully remote, to now being in many cases being hybrid. How do we make sure that remote access we're providing that function, but doing so in a secure and safe fashion? And then the next one here, again, sort of a corollary of what we were talking about earlier, how we integrating security into the overall business, not just having it being an IT function. Next to it, focusing around alignment there. And the last one, which Natalie did a great job talking about, but again, from an insurance perspective, especially if you rely on an outsourced service provider, do they have insurance, right? Is there adequate coverage between both your company and the service provider? very important questions to be able to have with your IT team or your IT provider. So going back to what I was talking about around that big picture around cyber trust, and how, like I said, I'm a big believer in that we need to shift narratives away from it, calling it cybersecurity, more so around cyber trust, and also intertwining that in what I have coined sort of the digital trust experience. More and more, and like I said, especially with new technologies emerging like artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, more and more organizations are becoming digital organizations first, right? So over the period of 5, 10, 15 years, the customer experience is going to be intertwined with a broader digital trust experience. And basically underpinning and supporting all of that is going to be cyber risk management or cybersecurity, right? So move away from that mindset of it being a necessary evil, move away from that mindset of it, sort of you're doing it just because you have to, move towards that mindset of treating it like a moving target, just like any other strategic business goal. Move towards that mindset where that whole concept of digital trust is going to be a foundational element of enduring customer relationships and part of that broader customer experience. And as what we're seeing as well, tailwinds changing around customer attitudes, changing around security and privacy. So whether you're B2B or B2C, even at the consumer level, we're seeing security and privacy tailwinds changing. And we're seeing, especially in Canada, right, there's greater pushes at both the provincial and federal levels for greater privacy or for updates around privacy legislation and to modernize privacy legislation. These are all going to be driving sort of the customer experience and customer attitudes. And this one is a bit of a buzzword because I think people have been using it for at least the past 10 years, but digital transformation. If your organization is in the midst of a digital transformation, you're trying to modernize your approach, you don't do security after, right? You bake it in the process, right? It needs to be intertwined, and I always refer to it as being intertwined with your company's DNA. As your company shifts and grows and evolves, so should your approach to cybersecurity and cyber risk management. How you approach security as a 5-person startup will look very different than when you become maybe a 50-person organization, 150, 500, 1,000 plus. Right? It morphs and changes as your organization morphs and changes. But what doesn't change is that it is, to me, a foundational piece of securing your organization's business growth. And like I said, to me, it's all about, in the very near future, delivering trust-inspiring customer experiences. That's an old slide there. I will pause now, and if there are some questions, we can facilitate those. And if not, there's some questions that Natalie and I can banter around.
I got no questions at this point.
I have more of a comment. I think that was a really good overview of everything. So I think it's really important to bring home to everyone, whether you're B2C, B2B, if you're not selling tacos for cash in the back of your Volvo, right? It's something you need to consider. And I think, being able to transfer the risk obviously is a good option, but also knowing what the underwriters are looking for and not to be deterred if you had a security breach in the past, right? Bad experiences make us wiser. So I think that's really valuable information. So thank you for sharing all of that.
I received an email from one of my clients, hi, Natalie, can you please review this contract for me? Contractual requirement. Nothing unusual about that. But typically I get an attachment that's, a PDF of the contract, right? But in this case, it was a link. And I thought, that's odd. Why is he sending me a link? So I called the client, and lo and behold, no, he did not send me that email. It's a scam. He's been hacked. Please don't open it. But it happens. It happens to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, someone told me just yesterday, we were talking about text messages and how they can be scams.
All kind of scams. And that's one of the reasons why when you go to a restaurant and instead of bringing you a menu, they ask you to scan the QR code. I will never, ever do that because there's a lot of QR code scams. Right, Dominic?
I'm glad I know that. Goodness.
It's always such good practice, and in that, if you get a text or an email, from your bank or whatever. You just navigate to the actual website. Never engage with a link in an email or a text. Go to the actual website, and then you'll be able to see that way, right? Because it's I often refer to as psychological warfare, because again, it's preying on fear, it's preying on the unknown, it's preying on some level of urgency, and I think just being able to put in certain, I'll say, skeptical mindsets. I'm not asking people to put on a tinfoil hat, at least not yet, but being able to just have a healthy dose of skepticism and just verify or validate it another way through the actual website, calling the actual customer service number. If it's from a person, actually picking up the phone or texting them on a different number, or using a different communication tool, WhatsApp, Signal, Carrier Pigeon, whatever you want, right? At least that way you're validating it through other means.
Yeah.
I may be overcautious because, FedEx have tried to deliver something to me by, text message. I've ignored it because thinking it's a scam. Finally, they had to call me and say, you need to pick up this package at your local outpost. And I finally picked it up after 2 weeks, but I really thought it was a scam. So that's my
So Dominic,
yes,
tell us, the most sophisticated scam that you have ever witnessed.
Well, that's a good question. I'll answer it in two veins. One is people really get hung up on the word sophisticated. The vast majority, I'm going to say 99.999% of any security incident that I've been involved in over the past 20 years has been relatively low sophistication. And the reason being is that most organizations, especially at the SMB level, they are not making it very hard for cyber criminals to break in. So think about it in which, even from a traditional warfare perspective, if you don't need to break out your best artillery to defeat an opponent, why would you? It's more costly, more could go wrong. So we're unfortunately, especially in North America, the majority of Canadian SMBs have made it painfully easy for cyber criminals to commit these types of attacks. So I think what's more surprising is the lack of sophistication. What I'm starting to see, though, especially with the birth and advent of generative AI, is basically calls, or more, basically whether it's calls or more believable emails, that's making it very, very hard to discern what's real and what's not. Stuff like that, I think, is certainly higher up in the sophistication ranks. A client of mine got a voice call that sounded like it was exactly the president of the company, asking for them to create basically a new vendor payment and send it to this brand new vendor that no one had heard of, and to send it was like a $100,000 payment. But because they had the procedural maturity that even if it was from the president, that the any amount over $5,000 had to be validated through another communication mechanism. So they ended up WhatsApping the president saying, just to verify that was you sending us a request. And he said, no, that was not me. I'm on vacation in the Bahamas right now. And they're like, wow. So that to me was quite sophisticated. And I heard it, and it sounded just like him. And sort of piecing it together, what we ended up finding was that he's someone who talks quite a bit online, and there's a lot of video clips of him. Basically, through generative AI, they're able to harness that voice and create a new message that sounded just like him. So I think we're going to be seeing certainly more sophisticated attacks of that nature in the coming years.
Yeah.
The solution there, people are like, you need all sorts of high tech to defeat generative AI. You don't. What defeated it there was very simple procedural maturity, low tech.
Yeah, pick up the phone or send a text. Well, thanks again, Natalie. Thanks, Dominic. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Pascal.
everyone.
Appreciate it. Nice being you.